We could start by making a distinction between judgment and appreciation. The mind categorizes by nature, so it will tend to compare forms between one another or situations, and indeed sometimes it can happen so that the extreme side of appreciation ends up being judgment. And very often judgment will, it's the same thing once again, it will echo something internal, and it's usually, very often, what we call in yoga a conditioned state. It's a pattern that we've seen as a child, or rather that we've heard. It's usually learned by word of mouth. We've heard words of judgment almost as a mantra, going on and on and on ever since we were a child, and automatically, because the mind registers through repetition, then as an adult we can sometimes see spontaneous judgment coming up. And very often when I ask people, is it rather mom or dad who was judgmental? And well, one of them pops up, and sometimes the both of them. Yep, indeed. So as soon as we've realized that it's only a pattern, like a sort of programming of the mind, you could say that the mind is a bit like a computer hard drive. We can put whatever we want in it, and we can also reprogram it at will. Once we are aware of that, we can either notice judgment without entertaining it, and in that case, what will happen is that it will diminish little by little to the point where there's no more judgment appearing. Or sometimes we can also have fun noticing every time a judgment comes up, and as yogi would say, we'll take the opposite thought, and once again, little by little, it will deprogram itself automatically. Yeah, there's also one last type of judgment, the judgment that actually speaks to ourselves, meaning sometimes there's a sort of, for instance, there's something that we don't like about ourselves, and we will judge the other for it, but really we're judging ourselves through the other. By talking about others and by having opinions about others, it's nothing but ourselves that we end up talking about. We're actually talking to ourselves. So it can be interesting to start noticing in which precise situations judgment comes up, because especially if it's judgment that comes with an emotion, it's important to investigate it, because we'll really realize what our internal resistances are, our internal locks, what we don't like about ourselves, and makes us judge it when we see it in others. So, as always, there's nothing bad or negative about judgment, since it's actually meant to bring us back to that we are and realize what we are, indeed. Well put. Judgment is also often a form of comparison. It's always set by the same pair, really, meaning the ego and the mind, which reintroduces the notion of temporality, because for judgment to exist, you need time. If there's no time, if there isn't the memory of time, there's no judgment, there's no opinion, none of that. So it enables the mind to refuel a sort of temporal structure. But what the mind doesn't know is that it itself is obviously used by consciousness, and consciousness sets this game in motion for us to go and investigate why we judge. This path that will bring us to realize what we judge is very well established and very well designed. It's perfect. Consciousness knows very well what it has to do. And there's nothing negative in all that. Judgment is part of the way. May we judge ourselves or others whatsoever. It will always bring us more in-depth understandings. But as for the mind, this enables it to revive the notion of time. It revives a form of temporality that keeps on playing so that the mind itself can exist. What's also interesting with judgment, we were talking about past lives earlier, and well, sometimes judgment can be related to tendencies from past lives. For instance, someone who's gone through a very monastic life, let's say very spiritual and pretty detached from all things material, well, they'll tend to judge matter. Or another example, someone whose spiritual life was very orthodox will tend to judge sexuality, exactly what we were talking about earlier. And this tendency can keep on coming back life after life. There are a few cases like that, the ones Pierre mentioned, those anteriorities, but also cases where people went through existences as counselors, lawyers, and otherwise, and all those activities have been around for a very long time, and so those people were asked for their opinions, and obviously they would sometimes make critiques and judgments, etc. So indeed, it can be related to all sorts of samskaras. So it's a good way to realize a lot of things in depth, absolutely. And it's quite funny because, well, most judgments, and what I mean by judgment is pointing something out and say, this is wrong. Well, there's nothing backing it up, really. Yeah, of course. Let's say sexuality is wrong, and when you ask why, no idea. There's no answer coming up whatsoever. It's totally empty. Now that's funny. Judgment is often based on some sort of principles we haven't even investigated ourselves. Like, that's how it is and no other way, but you have no clue why it is so. So the more we free ourselves from all that, the more we realize that this isn't how life works. Precisely so, experiences are not judged. To consciousness, everything is okay. Everything can be experimented. Only the character can verbalize and emit critics, judgment, and opinions, not consciousness. Consciousness is everything. So there's no room for critics, judgments, opinions. But it's still part of the game. Judging others comes to an end when we start understanding, you could say through empathy, when we fully understand others, there can't be any judgment left. What I mean by judging is condemning someone or saying, this is a really bad person, etc. Well, comes a moment where you can't say that anymore. It's not possible anymore because you understand all the ins and outs. We can see where that person's acting from. And this is the moment we can start reconciliating with all that is. We recognize consciousness that we are, we recognize consciousness in others, because it's the same one. And from that moment, there's no room left to judge or despise others. It disappears de facto. Anyway, there's not two anymore. All there is one. So inevitably, it's the same consciousness. So judgment drops automatically.